This has been a very productive week in the House as we continue our efforts to repeal and replace Obamacare. As I've said before, this promise is just too important, and the consequences of inaction are just too dire for American families for us just to give up.
That's Speaker Paul Ryan, of course, announcing the new and improved Obamacare repeal plan. White House reportedly pressuring House Republicans to make some progress before they recess at the end of the week. Now, as part of the plan, it includes setting up high-risk pools for people with serious injuries. A new editorial in U.S. News & World Report, it pokes some fun at the way the GOP is going about this. Quote, the GOP's zombie effort to repeal and replace Obamacare is looking less and less like 28 days later than Shaun of the Dead. If the first failed effort was tragedy, in other words, this dead and all but the motion version is like so much associated with the Trump administration. Farce. Robert Schlesinger, he wrote that piece. He's also the managing editor of the opinion page, and he's kind enough to give us a few minutes now. Robert, a lot to discuss. It is never boring in Trump land today, certainly no exception. But help me out here in terms of what you're hearing are the priorities of the administration, because depending on the day, let alone the week, I thought the president was almost relieved that the Obamacare repeal failed because he could put it off and get to some other things he thought could be more popular. But nonetheless, there still seems to be a major effort to get this thing done. I just don't see any way that Ryan can thread a needle for something to actually get through the House that has any chance of passing through the Senate. It's almost like they're wasting their time and making it possibly even worse, all of their own doing.
Right, and Trump himself has talked about, he on the stump has said things like, we've got to get past Obamacare so we can get to the good stuff like tax cuts. But as you say, it's not so much threading a needle; it's being able to bridge a chasm where Ryan has to cobble together a coalition big enough to pass something in the House. But you've got one wing of the party that basically wants to get rid of Obamacare, get rid of the protections it affords, get rid of any kind of government interference, and you've got another wing of the party that says, well, wait a second, there's some good stuff there. Our constituents have actually benefited from it. We need to save some of the good stuff. And
there's some really difficult stuff that they're trying to put into this that makes it even more draconian than the first version we saw, including getting rid of pre-existing conditions. A lot of promises the president made on the campaign trail now seemingly are on the table, and I don't think you'll find a Democrat, of course, but even any moderate Republican who's going to stay with us, let alone a lot of the folks who opted in on the state levels to the expansion of Medicaid. Now, that then pivots to, if this doesn't go anywhere, as the betting money would have it, how much of a hole does it put the president in? Not just that it's a loss, but I think he was counting on some of the savings for this, wasn't he, for either infrastructure or tax reform. Does the math add up for those other big ticket items if they don't get this thing done?
They were planning to use some of the savings from this on tax reform, which is obviously what Trump really wants to do, really wants to get to. But they realized, 2 weeks ago, they basically all threw up their hands and said, Obamacare is the law of the land, nothing we can do about it, we're on to tax reform. And then they started hearing from the people that they had promised for 7 years that they were going to repeal Obamacare. And they suddenly realized, well, wait a second, we can't actually explicitly fly the white flag. We have to go back to the kind of status quo ante, which is, we're working very hard on a repeal plan, and we're just weeks away. The GOP have said they're weeks away from coming up with a repeal and replace plan for something like 350 weeks now. So they want to move on to infrastructure. They have to move on to funding the government because at the end of the month, the government shuts down if they haven't passed a funding bill, and it's not entirely clear they'll be able to get enough votes to even do that. So it's as you say, it's never a dull day in Trump land.
It's a hot mess, and now it's further complicated by the Game of Thrones. Though we've heard this happening behind the scenes, but now we're actually seeing some of the shakeup. Obviously, Bannon off the NSC, but to me, what's the real story? Is it that, yes, this is rearranging deck chairs, or are we starting to see maybe, Jared Kushner and his faction, they're getting a closer ear of the president, and maybe it's more the GOP establishment who are getting a bigger seat at the table, or maybe this all changes next week. What do you read with what happened with Bannon? Discussions, or at least reporting that they had to, at least some big donors had to talk him from even all out quitting and resigning altogether. What does that tell you? Who's getting more of an influence? Who's getting less? Can we really even tell?
Kremlinology in the age of Trump, no pun intended, is definitely becoming a cottage industry. And you got to remember, with Trump, he doesn't like to have a unified staff that gets along. He enjoys having different factions that fight each other, and that is very much his management style. One of the things that struck me about Bannon leaving the NSC is how clumsily, as with much else in this administration, it was handled, where they said, Bannon was originally only put on the NSC to keep an eye on Mike Flynn, the first national security advisor, who, of course, was out of the administration 3.5 weeks after Trump was sworn in. And that raises all kinds of questions like, if you thought he needed someone to keep an eye on him, why was he put into that position in the first place? But as you say, a lot of this is being framed as part of the ongoing civil war, kind of battle for the soul of Donald Trump, where you have the neo-populist, conservative populist wing headed by Steve Bannon. You have establishment Republicans and Jared Kushner, who's the president's son-in-law, and obviously a very close advisor, with an ever-expanding portfolio that includes Mexico, peace in the Middle East, and visiting Iraq, and who knows what else. He seems to increasingly be siding with the establishment wing, and there are reports that he is dissatisfied with Bannon and the job Bannon has been doing.
The thing that's stunning to me is we have a Secretary of State, and I saw him appear the last couple of days, so I know he's not in witness protection. But if you're Rex Tillerson, all of a sudden the son-in-law, he's meeting with heads of state here. He's putting out statements, policy statements, before you're even in front of a camera. I mean, how much longer does Tillerson stand for this? I mean, and even to a different degree of Nikki Haley giving contrary positions from an administration, from even the Oval Office. Are they all freelancing here? Does anyone know who's on first? I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if Tillerson says, I didn't sign up for this.
And of course, Tillerson didn't even want the job. His wife had to talk him into it, and he has said he does not want press, which isn't really a position you can have if you're the Secretary of State of the United States, the leader of the free world. But part of this also gets back to a broader problem the administration has, where they, months into the term now, they've been incredibly slow and ineffective at filling out the sub-cabinet level jobs in the government. And there are literally hundreds of positions that not only haven't been filled, but they don't even have nominees for them yet. And if every incoming administration trying to take control of the bureaucracy has to fill out these jobs, and this administration has been very slow about doing it, and they've already had high turnover, not simply the high-profile things like Mike Flynn, but at lower levels. And again, there's this civil war going on between the Trump loyalists and the more traditional Republicans, where you're seeing Trump loyalists fleeing the administration because they feel like they've sort of lost that battle and are getting marginalized.
Devin Nunes was considered certainly one of the favorite sons, if you will, of Steve Bannon. And Bannon continued to make it clear that Nunes had his support. Is it coincidental that Nunes steps down the very day that Bannon has his portfolio shrunk as well? And moreover, before anybody starts doing cartwheels that Nunes is out, we got somebody else in, give a little education here, because they should hold those applause. Maybe a different guy in the chair here, but certainly nobody who acquitted himself really well in the Comey hearings himself.
Yeah, I mean, I think it probably is more coincidence than not that these things occurred. I don't think that, and I think Bannon's influence on Capitol Hill is quite limited, and this is actually one of the problems that he has had and the Trump administration has had, is that he has no experience legislatively, and he doesn't have a lot of sway up on the Hill. The House side of the investigation into what happened with Russia and the campaign has been a hot mess. This is an opportunity for them to reset, and hopefully they'll be able to take a page out of what the Senate has been doing, which has been much more collegial and cooperative. But we got to see what's going to happen here.
I think that is the understatement on so many different things. But, Robert, I really appreciate the time. Robert Schlesinger, thank you.
Thank you.
Up next, the panel will join us. I'm going to take a look at some local stories, including the budget stalemate in Albany and how that could impact you. Then, another Trump looking to run for higher office, you ask? Well, we're going to show you what Donald Trump Jr. could be considering.